Are you looking for a recipe for some gingerbread style festive salt dough decorations? Well, you've come to the right place. I'm just about to hang the last of my decorations onto my tree. If you watch on, I'll show you the whole making process from my recipe through to cooking and decorating, and also attaching these pretty little ribbon handles. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie from Julie Davis Flower Workshops and Flower Start, the online flower arranging classes. For my festive salt dough, I'm using 8 ounces of plain flour and 8 ounces of table salt, 3 ounces of ground cloves and 3 ounces of ground cinnamon, and then about 8 fluid ounces of water. I think I added a little bit more in the end, and I set my oven to 110 degrees centigrade, and I cook them probably for about 3 to 3.5 hours. So what you see me doing here is mixing all my dry ingredients together. I then start to add the water gradually. You don't want to flood your mix because you don't want it ending up too runny. So just a little bit at a time, mixing it through, and eventually when it's all combined together, you need to knead it until you can no longer feel the gritty grains of your table salt. After a while, I put down my wooden spoon and started working the dough with my fingers and just trying to combine it all together, and then adding more water as needed. This process doesn't take very long at all, just a couple of minutes, and I just keep working slowly, adding more water, just a few drops and tablespoons at a time. When your dough starts to come together, you can start kneading it and then shaping it until it becomes a nice smooth round ball. And once you're happy with your dough, take it out of the bowl and get your rolling pin ready. I'm going to cut my dough in half and package some of it away so I can make some salt dough shapes with my daughter when she comes back from school. So you can wrap it up in a piece of foil or in a bowl with a lid on the top. I'm going to use some beeswax paper to try and reduce my use of the plastic cling film. The next thing you need to do is to prepare your baking tins. So I'm using some baking parchment and shaping that and folding it to the right size and lining both my tins with it. I then take another sheet of parchment paper and fold it in half. I'm going to use this to roll my dough out in between, a really great way of stopping your dough from sticking to your work surface and keeping everything a bit tidier in the kitchen. My first piece of dough was a bit too big, so again I've cut it in half. So actually that's a quarter of my total dough mix here, just reshaping it into a ball, and then I'll roll it out to probably 2 or 3 millimeters thick. My baking parchment had small indentations on it, so as I opened up the paper, I could see it had sort of a texture to it, and I've decided I wanted to smooth it out, so I just went over really lightly with my rolling pin just to give a really smooth finish and to even out any bumps across the dough. I'm using a star-shaped pastry cutter for my first decoration, and then I use the end of a straw to create the hole so I can hang it up easily from my tree. You might want to play around with a variety of sizes of pastry cutters. I've got a small star and a large star here, and you'll see later on I've got some Christmas tree in small and large as well, and also a lovely snowflake design. And if you find your straw gets clogged up by making the holes for hanging your decorations, what I've done here is to use a kebab stick to shoot out the piece of dough at the end of the straw. You then need to transfer your dough shapes onto your baking tray, and I do this by pulling away all the excess pieces of dough first and then peeling the shapes off the baking parchment, and sometimes using a palette knife if it is a little bit too sticky. Once you've transferred your shapes onto your lined baking tray, you can then ball up the excess dough, roll it out again between the 2 sheets of parchment paper, and then move on to your next pastry cutter. This is a snowflake cutter, which I think overall I like the best, and I'll leave a link to a similar one in the show notes underneath the video. I then went through exactly the same technique of rolling, cutting and punching out holes so I could hang my decorations up. When you've filled up your first tray, you can put those into the oven. You can see here they're a lovely dark glossy brown colour, so into a really cool oven, the lowest setting, which for me was 110 degrees, and leave them for about 3 hours to dry. This is what my salt dough looked like part way through baking. I left them in the oven a little bit longer, just so they would dry out right the way through to the middle. Once your salt dough decorations have thoroughly dried out in the oven, take them out and put them on a cooling rack and let them cool down before you think about decorating them. Once cool, I stored my salt dough decorations in Tupperware boxes until I was ready to start decorating them. Some of my decorations had ridden slightly as I baked them. They weren't totally flat, but I just think that's part of the homemade appeal and the fact that these have been handcrafted and not factory produced. I'm going to channel the gingerbread vibe by decorating my salt dough decorations using this three-dimensional fabric paint. So it comes in a plastic bottle with a little nozzle, and if you're used to icing cakes, you'll be used to this technique. You need to be squirting out with a steady hand and producing little decorative shapes, and I always like to start with a dot and finish with a dot, so you don't end up with your icing or the paint sort of dragging upwards. So I'm going freehand really. I did look at a couple of magazines and some pictures online just to inspire me, but I'm trying to keep my decorations nice and simple, as if they do look like edible gingerbread. And of course you must not eat these, they are rock hard and absolutely full of salt. These are for decorative purposes only. Having drawn on the 6 lines through the centre of my snowflake, I then took the paint and did some feathery details along each one, just to fill in the centre of the snowflake. I really love this simple technique for decorating your salt dough, and of course you could use this for your real gingerbread. It's just a series of straight lines, and all you need to remember to do is start off with a dot, draw your line and finish with a dot, and that way you won't get strands of the paint or the icing lifting off. It gives a much cleaner effect. And then you just keep going, finessing your technique as you go, and remembering this is a crafting activity. You don't need to put yourself under pressure to get everything done straight away. You can pack away and pick up again when you've got more time. The only thing to remember though is that this fabric paint takes about 4 hours to dry, and if you feel that you've made a mistake and you don't like what you've done, like the Christmas tree you can see there, which I didn't like, I scraped it off with a palette knife when it was dry and repainted the effect the following day. When your icing decoration is dry, you'll need some ribbons to hang your decorations from. So I've just got a variety of offcuts. I tried to keep my ribbons in shades of white and red to keep it looking really festive. So the first thing you need to do is decide how much ribbon you need by folding it in half and cutting it off. And there's 2 options with your ribbon. If your ribbon is quite fine, I would suggest you fold it in half. I lay it over the top of my gingerbread, and then using the kebab stick, I push it through, which is much easier than trying to thread it through as if you were threading a needle and cotton. And then take the tails of your ribbon through the loop and pull them tight to secure, and then tie a knot at the top. And if you need to, you can neaten off the top edges, making them level, and I normally cut mine off at a slant so they look neat and don't fray. If your ribbon is slightly thicker or more substantial in weight, you can do the same technique but in reverse. So again, I measure out a length of ribbon, and then I'm going to tie my knot first of all at the bottom of the ribbon, and then thread my ribbon through from the back to the front, and the knot will be hidden behind my decoration and the loop will just rise up above it, and it gives a really sleek, streamlined look. This method of hanging only works though if you can tie a knot that's fatter and wider than the hole that you're threading the ribbon through, otherwise your decoration will just slide off. And here's a quick tour of the decorations I've hung on my tree this year. I've kept mainly to reds and whites, with a highlight detail of my gingerbread decorations also hung up with red and white ribbons. I'd love to know what theme you're using for your tree this year. Let me know in the comments below. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you next time.